Hey guys, we are going to be talking about the physical geography of the Middle East, North Africa, and Southwest Asia today. Not too long of a presentation, but it's important to be able to identify the different geographical features that we find in this very distinct region. So, the region that we're actually going to focus on is referred to as the Middle East and North Africa, or MENA. You'll notice that this area right here is North Africa. This area right here is what's commonly referred to as the Middle East. It's also often called Southwest Asia. And then this area over here is Central Asia. They are almost like distinct sub-regions within the region as a whole, but they have enough similarities that it makes sense for us to study them together. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing today. This is the map specifically that we will be focused on for this presentation and for the assignment that follows. We are looking at being able to find different seas, different gulfs, different oceans, bays, rivers, as well as peninsulas. Okay, when we find a lot of different types of water specifications, we often find peninsulas. And so my goal is for you guys to be able to identify the different seas and oceans and bays and gulfs, rivers, etc., and then to be able to find the way that they form different peninsulas. Okay, so that is our goal for this. You'll notice when we talk seas, you see some examples. So we've got the Red Sea right here. We've got the Black Sea up here, Caspian Sea over here. This right here, it's hard to see the name. This is the Aral Sea. You obviously don't see the full name of this, but for those of you who remember our study of Europe, this right here is the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, some other examples, we're going to look at gulfs. So here's the Persian Gulf right here. Here's the Gulf of Aden down here. So your goal is to be able to identify as many different bodies of water and examples of those as you can based on this map. Similar maps are available in your textbook, but I assume that most of you don't have your textbook with you. If you do, you are certainly welcome to look in that for additional information. Okay, it will provide a good resource too, but you don't need to for our purposes today. The next slide, we're talking about water. We did our desert graphic organizer back right before we went to distance learning, before the building was closed. And so you know that this region is very dry. There's lots and lots of desert in this region. And yet we also find all of these different examples of water, okay? How many seas can you find? How many gulfs can you find? How many oceans can you find? All of these different resources and water examples exist within this region that is also very, very dry. So the goal for me is for you guys to be able to identify, why is it so dry even with all of these different resources? Okay, so your job for today is to be able to identify what a sea is, what a gulf is, and what an ocean is, and see how many you can find within this region and which ones you can list. Okay, that will be the assignment that's loaded in Canvas in conjunction with this presentation. The next slide, we've also talked about peninsulas. A couple slides ago, we talked about how when you find lots of different examples and types of water, you also tend to find peninsulas. So for those of you who can identify these different peninsulas, take a minute, see if you can figure out what goes what, like which ones these are, and then I will explain, or I'll give them up to you. Okay, but these are all peninsulas. Now, it asks what a peninsula is. A peninsula is any piece of land that is surrounded by water on three sides. Okay, so it's still connected to a bigger area of land, but it does tend to jut out into some sort of body of water. So this area over here, This actually, let me pick a different pen. This is the Korean Peninsula. This right here, you guys might have been able to identify. This is Florida. And then this, for those of you that have been to Mexico, this is actually Baja. Baja extends south of California. Okay. Again, back to the map that I gave you to use for this assignment. Your goal is to find peninsulas from that map. Okay. All right. So now we're talking usable water. Seas, Gulf, and oceans. Is that water usable? And by usable, can you drink it? Can you cook with it? Can you bathe in it? Is it something that will that you could water plants with, water crops with? So you can tell me whether or not that is. Another water resource that we see and that we need to talk about is the rivers. What rivers do we find in this region? Again, go back to that map. That map is also loaded separately in the Canvas assignment, so you can access it there too, so you don't have to come back through the presentation. But water that we find in rivers, is that water usable? And you tell me, is it something that you could drink? Is it something that you could water your crops with? Is it something that you can bathe in and cook with? Okay. And your goal also is to be able to identify the primary rivers in this region. Now, there's 3 of them. 2 of them make up what at one point was referred to as Mesopotamia, or the Fertile Crescent. So if you can think back to all of your elementary education, where you learned originally about Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent, do you remember what 2 rivers make that up? And can you identify that location on a present-day map? The 3rd river, so these are 2 rivers make up Mesopotamia, and you need to tell me which 2. The 3rd river is actually part of a different area in the region, just as important and just as vital to the livelihood and level of success along that river and in that area. But what's the 3rd? So be able to find the 3rd. So you're looking for the primary rivers in the region. Okay, and remember, we're looking at North Africa, Southwest Asia, and Central Asia. And then finally, we've talked about how this is such a dry climate. These we already know because we talked about them in class. But 50% of this region is considered a desert. Characteristics of a desert include less than 20 centimeters of water annually, very little vegetation, lots of barren rock and dirt and sand, not a lot of weather. Generally, you have very, very hot temperatures in the day and very cool temperatures at night because there's nothing to insulate the land that keeps it warm. You also have the appearance of sandstone. So if you remember, this is the tactile desert lab that we talked about, where you went around the classroom and you picked stuff up and you tried to identify what aspect of the desert that item represented. It's the salt and the sand and the super hard concrete, which is referred to as desert pavement in the desert. You have the different types of sandstone with different sizes of particles, sizes of grains of sand. All of that would be characteristics of deserts. And then deserts are caused by the 3 main things that you specified in your desert graphic organizer. The weather or the lack of weather, meaning it doesn't get rain, it doesn't get any precipitation. We looked at, if you'll remember, we looked at the wind map. And if there's no wind in the area, which when you look at the wind map, you see that there's no wind in the area, wind is what brings weather. Okay, the last couple of days here in Utah, it's been super windy because we have this storm that's kind of blowing in. But if you don't have wind, then no weather's coming either. The rain shadow effect is where you have the rain and the wind and the weather systems that run into the mountains, and they get pushed up over the top. As they move up the mountains, the water drops, precipitation falls. As it gets over the top of the mountains and goes back down the mountain where the water or where the air starts to get warmer, whatever water is left in those clouds is going to evaporate. And so on the windward side of the mountains, you have very lush, very vegetative, wet areas. On the other side of a rain shadow, the other side of those mountains, you have very dry, very barren deserts. And then desertification is that idea that people are responsible or contribute to the creation of deserts, either through overuse of the land or overgrazing of the land, allowing their cattle or their sheep or their goats to overgraze the land so that it strips the land of the resources in the soil that would produce vegetation. All of that disappears if you overwork it, overuse it. You deplete those resources out of the soil, which means once arable, farmable, good land becomes desert, can't be used anymore. All right, that is the end of our presentation. So you can now refer back to the assignment in Canvas, where you will answer those definitional questions. What's a sea? What's a gulf? What's a peninsula? Okay, as well as being able to find examples of those within the map for this region. And then just submit that through Canvas and let me know if you guys have any questions. Thank you. See you next time.